Everyone. Welcome to Rumi and the Masnavi in South Asia, Interpretation and Soulcraft. Today's discussion is a bit different from your typical academic webinar. Our goal today is to learn about the 13th century Persian poet Jalaluddin Rumi, his masterpiece, the Masnavi, and its reception and interpretation in South Asia. But we want to do more than think about this in an academic sort of way, lingering on points of history or giving you names, terms. We want to do some of that, but we also want to explore what the Masnavi means to us, why it matters, and why Persian Islamic studies, focusing on South Asia and beyond, deserves attention. Rumi's Masnavi speaks to all of us here today in a powerful way, but also in different ways. For me, Rumi was the reason why I pursued Islamic studies. I discovered Coleman Barks's translations of Rumi in a Borders bookstore when I was an undergraduate, in love with the plays of Shakespeare, and began to realize that everything I sought in the study of English literature might lie elsewhere and in a much more meaningful way. Rumi's poetry, especially his Masnavi, is a prolonged consideration of the soul, longing for union with God. But it's also about theology, ethics, life, love, friendship, law, and wisdom. In fact, the topic is so vast that I am grateful to share the burden with three esteemed panelists who will help us think about Rumi's Masnavi and its lives in South Asia. The first of those panelists is Dr. Shariq Khan. Dr. Khan is currently a humanities teaching fellow at the University of Chicago, from where he also completed his PhD in the South Asian Languages and Civilizations Department. He has interests in the intersections between poetry, aesthetics, and religion, with a special focus on Persian in the Islamic world. He grew up in Lahore, the Mughal city of gardens, and the city of the famous lover of Rumi, the poet Muhammad Iqbal. Our second guest is Imam Tariq Rasheed. Imam Tariq Rasheed comes from the renowned scholarly family of the ulama of Farangi Mahal in Lucknow, India. He received his elementary and middle school education at Christ Church School, a Catholic British school in Lucknow, before completing memorization of the Quran in 1983 at Madrasa Furqaniya. He earned a bachelor's degree in English literature and a master's degree in Arabic language and literature from the University of Lucknow. In 1992, he was conferred the degree of Alim at Darul Ulum Nadwat al-Ulama and received ijaza in hadith from Sheikh Abul Hassan Ali Nadwi, completing the first year of the Mufti course the following year. In 2003, he earned a master's degree in educational leadership from the University of Central Florida. Since 1993, Imam Rasheed has served as director and imam of the Islamic Center of Orlando. He is the editor and publisher of Fatwa Abul Hay, and the author of several works on Islamic ethics and scholarship. He founded the Al-Ghazali Chair of Islamic Studies, the Al-Ghazali program in Islamic Studies at UCF, which bringing you this program here today. And he serves as a family and marriage counselor in Orange and Osceola counties, is frequently consulted by local media, and was named Spotlight Person of the Orlando community by the Orlando Sentinel in 2007. He was awarded Interfaith Leader of Central Florida in 2026. Our third esteemed guest is Haroon Siddiqui. Haroon Siddiqui is editorial page editor emeritus and a former columnist at the Toronto Star, Canada's largest newspaper. He is a senior fellow at Massey College, University of Toronto, and a former distinguished visiting professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. Siddiqui is the recipient of the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian honor, as well as the Canadian Journalism Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award. He has also received honorary doctorates from York University and Toronto Metropolitan University. A leading advocate for writers' freedom of expression, Siddiqui is a former president of PEN Canada and has served on the board of PEN International, which has 145 chapters in 101 countries. He is the author of My Name Is Not Harry, a book that I have, and Being Muslim, and the editor of an English anthology of modern Urdu poetry. Haroon Siddiqui hails from a family of distinguished religious scholars and Sufis from India. His great-great-great-grandfather, Mufti Elahi Bakhsh, is known for composing an ending to Rumi's Masnavi in 1801. We will today first hear from Dr. Shariq Khan, who has dedicated years of his life in the study of the reception of the Masnavi in South Asia. And then after Dr. Khan's introduction, we, the remaining panelists, will have an open discussion. So, Dr. Khan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cyrus, and
Thank you.
hello to everyone and salam. And I'm very, very grateful to be part of this. And thank you, Cyrus, for organizing this, getting us all together. I think this is a fantastic initiative, and I look forward to contributing in whatever way I can. Um, I'll give a little sort of an overview of the kinds of things that I've touched in my work regarding the reception of the Masnavi in South Asia. And like your own sense of wonder leading into um, the study of Islam and the study of Rumi, I similarly had an experience of a sense of wonder at the intensity and depth of engagement with the Masnavi in South Asia among various groups, but most prominently the ulama and the mashayikh, the scholars and the Sufis, which is going to be a running theme through this conversation. And it's an honor to be part of this conversation with descendants of two of the most prominent figures in this line of ulama and mashayikh who have engaged with the Masnavi in very meaningful terms. And then for me personally, the figure of Iqbal and his engagement with Rumi, which included both the Masnavi and the Diwan of Shams. Um, that was also sort of, it felt to me to be a culmination of a longer tradition. And it's that longer tradition that I've been trying to trace. So there'll be more of a historical backbone here, but I hope that there'll be more thematic issues that we can then talk about once I'm finished this presentation. I'll just begin. I think I'll begin where most, if you mention the Masnavi, especially in South Asia, but not exclusively in South Asia, to someone who's familiar with it, and especially to an alim or a sheikh, it's likely that you will hear this verse, which is Masnavi Maulavi Manavi Hast Quran Dar Zubane Pahlavi, which simply means that the Masnavi of the spiritual master of Rome is the Quran in Persian. Um, that's sort of a common response to a conversation about the Muslim. And there's something specifically South Asian about this as well, in that this verse is more popular in that region than in other regions of the Islamic world where Persian or where the Masnavi is read. And my dear teacher Franklin Lewis was someone who noticed this and mentioned this in one of his articles, which talks about how all the printings of the Masnavi in South Asia have this verse printed on the cover, whereas that's not the case necessarily for the printings in other regions. So, I mean, besides that, I think it's a very you mentioned the difficulty of talking about what the Masnavi is, how many things it is, how many genres, how many. It's very hard to sort of like categorize. So I feel this verse is actually maybe the best sort of characterization because it's relating it directly to scripture, which itself is extremely hard to characterize and has that same sort of range. And it also indicates that this work is very sort of like in a close relationship with scripture. So I think it's a good sort of verse to keep in mind as we think about what is the Masnavi, how is it received, and the kind of respect that it is accorded in all parts of the Islamic world, but especially in South Asia. So, as far as the historical tradition of engagement with the Masnavi goes, the reception is kind of extensive with Rumi's own lifetime, as in it reaches South Asia very, very close to his own life. And one of the earliest examples that we have is of Yahya Maniri, who's a Sufi sheikh based in Bihar. And we have evidence that he is giving the dars of the Masnavi in Bihar at the time. And this is sort of like um, only a few decades after the death of, after the passing away of Maulana Rum. So the reception begins very early on, but it really takes off, and this is also where my own work begins in earnest. It really takes off with the Mughal period, and especially around Akbar's time. There are various reasons for this. We don't need to go into them too much, but in general, the general conditions become very favorable for a flourishing of Persian language and literature generally. In my another teacher of mine, Muzaffar Alam, there'll be a lot of mention of my teachers because this is obviously I'm very indebted to all of these people that I've learned from, and so he's someone who has shown that Persian takes a new life with the coming of the Timurids, or the Mughals as they're more commonly known. Um, there's a renewed interest in Persian in the 16th century in South Asia because of that. There's a more specific reason in that we have a dasturul amal, or a circular for officers and all of those who work for the empire and the state in Akbar's time, which is sort of a very general sort of um, summary of a vision of how the empire should be run in both its functional and its ethical terms. And one very interesting thing about the Dastur is that there's a clause in there which says that all officers of the empire, when they're free, when they have leisure time, should use that to read books, and books of akhlaq in particular. And there are three books that are named, and one of them is the Masnavi of Rumi. So that's actually a very significant. It's not the only reason why you see this. It's on its own momentum, but it definitely gets a push here. And and it's taken very seriously as well. There's one Mughal officer in particular, Abdul Latif Abbasi Gujarati, who is really an exceptional, remarkable figure in this tradition of South Asian engagement with Rumi, and sort of like, in a sense, begins many, many genres that then take a life of their own. And again, it's someone that Professor Alam, Muzaffar Alam, has written about, and we almost owe this knowledge to him. Um, and Abdul Latif writes a commentary. He prepares a critical edition of the Masnavi. It does a lot. It makes a dictionary for the Masnavi, and it really incredible figure. And we can talk more about him if we'd like. So that sort of sets the thing off. But more than any bureaucrats or any other social group, as I mentioned, it's the ulama and the mashayikh uh, who to me is the most sort of like prominent group of actors engaging with the Masnavi. And this is really remarkable um, because of this very particular configuration or relationship between religion and poetry, theology and verse, and such close engagement with the poetic work by theologians or scholars and so forth. And it really troubles this common idea, an Orientalist idea to some extent, of Islam sort of being split at its core between a heterodox, antinomian, sort of law-free, exploratory, poetic Islam, and then an orthodox, law-abiding, sort of Sharia-centered, Sharia-minded Islam. What we have here, what I'm trying to show is that this whole line of ulama and mashayikh, who are, there's no doubt about their sort of orthodoxy in that sense, and their Sharia abidingness and so forth, and are also at the same time the most remarkable readers and lovers of the Masnavi. So my dissertation tries to my upcoming book tries to capture something of this, and of the various forms of their engagement with the Masnavi, which includes many genres. There's the intikhab or the selection from the Masnavi. There's the shara or the commentary. There's the dars or the teaching of the Masnavi to a group of students. There's the tarjuma, which is translation of the Masnavi into languages such as Urdu and other vernacular languages, which we can again talk about. Memorizing the Masnavi is another thing that's actually very surprisingly common given the length of the work. It's really remarkable. And there's also the tashih of the Masnavi, which is the sort of editorial, preparing a critical edition of the Masnavi. Out of these, I thought I'd just talk briefly about two of these genres, which are also most related to the um, uh, our two esteemed guests and their family connections with this tradition. So one important genre is the shara or the commentary, and it's there's a very rich, extensive range of commentaries in Persian written in South Asia that begins with, in a sense, Abdul Latif, but includes a lot of other figures, Mir Nurullah Ahrari, Afzal Abadi, Wali Akbar Abadi. And then at the end of this sort of like 2 century, almost 2 century tradition of Indo-Persian commentaries on the Masnavi is the commentary of Maulana Bahrul Uloom. And that really is sort of a culmination of the Indo-Persian tradition of commentary. It's sort of like at the end of this tradition, and it has the features of sort of a lookout. It's looking back to all of the previous commentaries and able to synthesize them very and include its own very original take on the Masnavi. After this, the shift, and this is we're talking about sort of like the late 18th century, and after this, the shift is towards Urdu commentaries, and so this is sort of like, in a sense, the major Persian commentary of the time. And Mary Shimel, who's a famous Islamic studies scholar, called it the most famous commentary of the Masnavi, and the most popular comment, one of the most popular commentaries ever written in South Asia. And it's she also considered it to be the best introduction to Rumi's theology. So really, impressive work. There's a thinker scholar in Pakistan, Ahmad Javed Sahab, whom I may talk about more. He made this comment that in some ways it outdoes even the Masnavi itself, and he said that obviously in a you know with wonder at how good this commentary is. The other engagement with the Masnavi that I want to talk about, the other genre, is the tatimma, or the completion of the Masnavi. And this was the Masnavi. It raises the question: why does the Masnavi need a completion? Well, because it was left incomplete by Maulana Rum, and um, this itself is very interesting because it's not as if he passed away and couldn't complete it. He lived for another decade, but he kind of refused to complete it. And we can talk about why that is the case. It's very unique, it's kind of remarkable. But what's even more remarkable is that he mentions that someone else will complete this at some time. Um, and many people try this. But for some reason, it's Mufti Ilahi Bash Kandhlawi, who's a scholar, again at the end of the 18th century, who writes this tatimma or completion of the Masnavi. And that's the one that becomes the most sort of famous. That becomes sort of like the official completion of the Masnavi. And to the point that it's actually printed um, at the end of Masnavi printings in South Asia very, very regularly. So it's almost assumed that this is the completion. And for the completion to occur in this Kasbah in North India, in Kandla, um, so you have the 13th century Persian poet based in Konya, and you have its completion coming in the 18th century in Kandla. That sort of illustrates very nicely the kinds of trans-regional, trans-temporal connections that the reception of the Masnavi shows us. Um, After these, Deoband actually has a very important role to play in engagement with the Masnavi. Haji Imdadullah, who's sort of like the spiritual sheikh of many of the Deobandi founders, was very, very important. Maulana Thanvi, if you read his Malfuzat and so forth, it's almost as if he can't pass 5 minutes without quoting the Masnavi. That's how frequently, how sort of ingrained in his sensibility this is. And I've also heard that Qari Tayyib Sahab also gave the dars of the Masnavi in Deoband. So that's another thing. Deoband is not really in the popular conception, at least, thought to be this kind of continuation of this tradition of poetry in Persian and so forth. But that's also something that my work tries to challenge. And finally, I'm also interested in the question of whether this configuration, this relationship with the Muslim in South Asia, has any bearing on the South Asian Muslim navigation of modernity in the 19th and 20th centuries. And the answer in the form of Iqbal is a very emphatic and very significant yes. And we can talk about that as well. And I'll just end by saying that this is a very live tradition, and it's we're very lucky that it continues. Obviously, there have been many changes, many historical ups and downs in between, but it continues to the day. And the dars of the Masnavi, the citation of the Masnavi, is something that I'll probably hear in the Jummah that I go to 2 days later, and the Imam is likely to cite something from it. That's how sort of like alive it remains. And I recently heard a friend of mine, very dear friend of mine, Mustafa Aziz, told me that Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, who's a scholar based in England, mentioned that there's an imam in Aberdeen in Scotland who has memorized the entire Masnavi. So this is sort of like contemporary with ourselves. And again, the person involved is not specifically a literator, or he's an alim, he's an imam, he's someone who's leading the prayers and so forth. And that's the relationship between piety, theology, and poetry that is so fascinating about the reception of Rumi Masnavi in South Asia. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to really learning much more from Haroon Sahab and Imam Tariq. And I'm really honored to um, uh, be in a conversation with them, especially given their own achievements, but those of their elders who they are representing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That was excellent. I think we all learned a lot. I appreciate that. And let's get to that, Imam Tariq and Harun Sahib. I mean, you're both here because you have a deep connection to the Masnavi. I'd love to hear from each of you, about that, about your interest in the Masnavi and your connection to it. Shall we start, Imam Tariq? If you could start us off, and then we'll go to Harun Sahib, if that's okay.
Okay. Okay. So now
Please.
yeah. Hello. So Dr.
Salam
Cyrus,
alaikum.
yeah, thank you for organizing this wonderful meeting, and it was nice hearing Dr. Shariq Khan. And it's an honor to We're talking to Haroon Siddiqui Sahab. Um, he is our elder here in North America, and Mr. Haroon Siddiqui had done so much in his life, and it's truly an honor to be sitting here and talking to him. And inshallah, looking forward to listening to him. Um, by the way, I was trying to buy your book yesterday, um, so I'll have your book. My name is not Harris, so yeah. So
I'll
I'm
send
looking
you a
I'm looking forward to reading that. But I heard your interview yesterday on YouTube regarding this book, so I'm really interested in doing that. Uh, so my interest in Masnavi has been like a family-oriented interest because my elders back in Lucknow, Frangi Mahal, um, in Milads, they will be reciting Masnavis on a regular basis. So I kind of inherited the love of Masnavi from my elders. Um, and the way they will recite the Masnavi, the love and the respect that I would feel when our elders would be reciting the ashar from Masnavi was something that I really treasure. Although at that time I did not understand Persian language, but then they will interpret it, they will explain it. So, it just gave you a sense of deepness when they would explain the meaning of the ashar of Masnavi. And then when I grew up in Lucknow, Fringi Mahal, I found out that Mullah Bahlul Sahab had written this wonderful commentary on it. In our Kutubkhana back home, we had a copy of the Sharh of Masnavi by Mullah Bahlul, and it was published way back in, I think, 1860 something by Munshi Nawal Kishore. So I have that with me. Yeah, so we used to read it, and my dad used to read some parts of it. So that was very, very profound, and I really treasure those memories when my dad would be reciting those ashar, and our uncle and other elders will be reciting Masnavi. Um, Talking about the Shara of Mullah Bahlul, Mullah Bahlul was the son of Mullah Nizamuddin Sahab, who originated Dars Nizami. Mullah Bahlul was a person who was born in 1731, and he passed away in 1810. Now, he was a unique scholar in the sense that not only that he was very much a scholar in every sense of the word. I mean, he had great masterly in Quran and Hadith because he wrote few books. For example, one of his books is Fawakih al-Rahmut, which is a shara on Muhibbullah Bihari's book, Musallim al-Subut, which is on Usul al-Fiqh. But then his other books are also very well known. For example, Rasail al-Arkan. Rasail al-Arkan was written by Mullah Bahrul Sahib in around 1780s. And Shah Abdul Aziz Muhaddis Dehlavi, after he got a copy of Rasail al-Arkan, he was unfamiliar with Mullah Bahlum. But when he got that copy of Rasail al-Arkan, he said, whoever the author is, he's an ocean of knowledge. So he used the word ocean of knowledge, Bahrulum. So since then, the word or this title Bahrulum became synonymous with his name, Abdul Ali. His name was Abdul Ali. So his commentary on Masnavi Room became so well received and so popular that it has been in print since then. Um, Now, talking about Masnavi, what I, as an imam here in US for the last 30 years, what I see in Masnavi is that, I feel that the world right now, to be honest, needs this beautiful teaching of Masnavi, which is based on love, because the main theme of Masnavi is love, love with the Creator and love with the creation. And I really believe that the work of Maulana Room needs to be popularized. You know, and what one thing very interesting is the time in which Masnavi was written, because people like Imam Ibn Taymiyyah came after the time of Maulana Rumi. And for example, the disciple of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi, he wrote that famous commentary on Manazil al-Sarin, which is called Madarij al-Salikin. Now, Madarij al-Salikin is in Arabic language, and it's talking about tasawwuf, the same topic that Masnavi is dealing with. And what is amazing is that we see that coming from a disciple of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, you know, Ibn al-Qayyim Jawziyah is just writing at length about love, about the same topic that Masnavi is dealing with. And since I'm teaching Madarij al-Salikin for many years here in the Islamic Center, so, and then I have Masnavi there as well. So I see that Ibn al-Jawzi must have been inspired by Masnavi, because when you look into the writing of Ibn Taymiyyah, his teacher, and now you look into the writing of Ibn al-Qayyim, there is a stark difference. Stark difference. So something to look into is that what inspired Ibn al-Qayyim to completely change the way his previous books are, or what he learned from his teacher Ibn Taymiyyah. So I'm pretty sure that Ibn al-Qayyim was inspired by Masnavi in his book Madarij al-Salikin. Right now, you know, the message of Masnavi needs to be really talked about. It needs to be spread all over the world, because you know, what a wonderful book, what a wonderful book, and right now it is needed. So I'll stop here, and I'm looking forward to participating in this discussion. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you. Haroon Sahib, please. We'd love to hear from you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
Salam.
These two learned presentations. I was just thinking while I'm listening is that it may be useful for your listeners and viewers who may not be completely familiar with Rumi, let alone Masnavi and so on, to sort of get back and take a broader look for those who may not be familiar. One is, of course, we know that Rumi is now the most popular poet in English translation in North America, as perhaps also Europe. That's one part of it. The modern popularity of Rumi was, of course, from the English translations of Coleman Bach, who, by the way, does not speak any Farsi, does not know any Farsi. He was translating from previous English translations of the poet. Number two is the first brush with North American popularity, if you remember, came in 1990s when Deepak Chopra from California recorded the CD of the love poems of Rumi, and we had Madonna and other celebrities reciting it, and reciting it beautifully. It's a 52-minute CD, and you can Google it and listen to it. It has a rhythm, it has a rhyme, it's seductive, it's addictive. And then, of course, the 800th anniversary of Rumi, 2008, was declared as the year of Rumi by UNESCO. And so that brings us to the popularity of Rumi in North America. And a lot of Muslims, Rumi lovers, feel very proud of it. But what happened along the way is that Rumi got de-Islamicized from his Islam. He was presented as some new age guru, a guru without God, which is exactly the opposite of what Rumi was. Rumi was a scholar. Rumi ran a madrasa. Rumi was a Maulvi. Rumi issued his own fatwa. So this decoupling of Rumi from his Islam speaks to two geopolitical realities of the moment. Number one is that it is far easier to sell Rumi without Islam than to sort of, because Islam has been so demonized in the West that it is better to present him as some sort of a non-Islamic person. So that is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is, even in the modern parlance, when we speak of Sufi and Sufism, what do we think? What we think is, in Western geopolitical terms, a Sufi is generally described as one who is not, he is a Muslim light. He is not really a Muslim. Because it serves the broader geopolitical aims of the United States and the others, dating back to the Crusades, because the best Muslims are those who are the least Muslim. So we have this extraordinary dichotomy of a very religious scholar whose entire poems and poetry is suffused with Islamic references and Muslim and the Quran, has been very cleverly, disingenuously been decoupled from his Islam, because then it refers to what I just mentioned, that it serves the overall Western purpose. So that is the sort of a political commentary on it. The second part of it that I want to speak to is, generally it is not understood as well that Rumi was a prolific poet, and he wrote dozens of poems and poetry throughout his life, and Masnavi is one of his products, his longest poem. How long was the Masnavi? First of all, even go further back. What is Masnavi? Masnavi is really a form of poetry. It's a form of poetry which lends itself to telling stories, and there's a rhyming poetry and couplets, and allows for diversions to come back to the main point. It's a form of poetry. But Rumi's Masnavi is so important that the word Masnavi is now understood only in terms of Rumi's Masnavi. So Rumi's Masnavi is a form of poem, but his Masnavi has become the title of the genre. That's what needs to be clarified. How long is the Masnavi? Masnavi was 25,700 rhyming couplets. That is longer than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. So you can imagine how big that poem is. Yet, as Tariq mentioned, he left it unfinished. And his son, who was also a Sufi and also a poet, Sultan Walad, asked him, "Why don't you finish it?" And the Maulana said, "It is in my heart, but it is not coming out." Meaning either he was in bad health, or he did not feel like finishing it, or whatever. But then he answers in another couplet. He says, "It's in my heart, but it's not coming out. But it will come someday to someone somewhere who is a man of stout heart, or is a man of great heart," something like that. So this is what we are dealing with, this great treasure, which, like Schubert's 10th Symphony, has been left unfinished. And then we come to what Shariq said. Two more things happen. A lot of people. So Rumi's Masnavi is in 6 volumes. Book 1, Book 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th book is left unfinished. There have been claims throughout the centuries that a 7th volume has come about. Somebody has claimed to have written a 7th volume, or that the Maulana himself completed the Masnavi and wrote a book 7 later in life. But most experts agree that that did not happen. what Dr. Shariq spoke about is that one person who happened to be my great great grandfather in India, Maulana Mufti Ilahi Bakhsh, he conjectured an end to it. It's not the seventh volume. It is not to be confused with the claims of seventh volume. He conjectured an end to it, and I'll come back to it. The last point I want to make is the following. The period that we're dealing with, the geographic area that we are dealing with, Southeast Asia, mostly British colonial India, throughout the Mughal period of 350 odd years or so, Persian was the official language of India, Indian courts. This is not generally realized. And it extended to the five southern states of the Deccan in India. Farsi was the lingua franca of the courts, which meant that there was a whole refined cultural class of people who routinely spoke Persian. And this was also influenced by the fact that a great many Persian scholars had been invited from Iran to the courts of the Mughals and also the courts of the South. And they were people who were refined people who spoke poetry and who routinely spoke three languages: Farsi, Urdu, the local language, which is an offshoot of Sanskrit and Arabic and Persian, and three, Arabic, of course, the language of the Quran. So to be a learned man, to be a refined man, it was just assumed that you spoke all three languages. And these were principally Muslims, but not exclusively Muslim. A lot of Hindus learned of Persian and spoke Persian and went to madrasas where they were educated and so on in India. And this lasts through the middle period of the British colonial empire onto the 18th and 19th centuries. Today, there is hardly any Persian spoken in India. You get periodic mentions of Persian. The last mention was in 2017 or 18 when the famous great cricket player Virat Kohli got married, and the guests got a copy of Rumi's love poems translated in English. That's the only time you hear about Farsi, except in pockets of India and, of course, Pakistan. So that is the background overall that we are talking about. And this love of Muslims to Masnavi is based on exactly the opposite of the popular notion that he had nothing to do with Islam. And it flies in the face of the second popular notion that I started with, is that Sufism somehow means you're not exactly Muslim, you're a light Muslim. And therefore you're a good Muslim. That's what the French tried in Algeria, for example. That's what the British tried in colonial India. Now the West is trying it at this point. The last point I'll make, the last point, is people have separated Sufism from Islam, and it shows up in another place. There is such a thing as Sharia compliant Sufis, because Sufis, some of the best scholars of Sufism have been Sharia compliant Muslims and scholars and so on, represented by such places as Imam Tariq's ancestors, such as my ancestors from Darul Uloom Deoband and so on. And within that thread, there is another one, because there are a lot of Sufis who unfortunately have excused themselves from the rituals of Islam. They don't say it, but they don't particularly pay much attention to the rituals of Islam. But we are talking about Sharia compliant Sufis, Imam Tariq's ancestors, my own ancestors, and so on. And they have been great contributors to the scholarship of Rumi. And that's where I'll stop, and let's have a discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I should point out that Haroon Sahib has had his great-great-grandfather's completion of the Masnavi translated. And so soon, inshallah, we'll be seeing it in English as well. So we have some questions from the audience, and I'll get to them in just a minute, inshallah. But I was wondering first, do you have questions for each other? things that you'd like, you've been listening to each other. Do you have anything that you'd like to ask each other? Maybe any of you have a question that the rest of you could answer.
We were so clear that we don't need to ask each other anything.
Maybe I have questions. I have questions. If you don't, I mean, I'm ready.
No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
Yeah. But does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a
Shariq?
question for
Yeah.
Haroon. And again, thank you so much to both of you. I'm astounded by your knowledge and your political sensitivity as well. And I think the points that you've made are very, very, very um, um, appropriate and timely. And the problems that you've mentioned are very important to address. So thank you for that. My question is, I'm just very curious, as Imam Tariq mentioned, the way that because of this family history of the forms in which he saw the Masnavi around him in his family and so forth. I'm just curious, is there a family lore that has come down to you about Mufti Ilahi Bakhsh? And is that a figure that has been sort of like that is in your family and your elders, it's been coming down, and are there stories about him, and how celebrated is he within the family?
Very much so. First of all, while I was growing up, both my father and my mother and my uncle would recite a Rumi verse to either praise us or to admonish us. We, even knowing well that we are too ignorant to understand it, so they must have thought it will do some good to be reading some poetry and put it in our ears and so on. But we grew up with the lore that a family ancestor had completed the Masnavi. That much we knew, which is a very primitive knowledge, but nothing beyond that. And then, of course, India goes through this great upheaval. British colonial empire completely warps the Islamic and Muslim culture. We go through that. Then we end up with independent India. A lot of these sheikhs that we are talking about were prominent activists in the anti-colonial movement, including Mufti Ilahi Bakhsh. But then, as I said, there's hardly any Farsi spoken. I did not speak Farsi, and so we lost that great tradition. But this lore that a great ancestor had finished the Masnavi has been written up in Urdu books, for example. So you read it at a distance without fully comprehending it. And when I retired from my journalistic profession, I made it a point to go back to Kandla. I'd been going to Kandla from the 1950s, being my ancestral village. And I have gone back 4 times with the explicit purpose of exploring it. And as you would know, that there is a Mufti Ilahi Bakhsh Academy in Kandla. So I've gone there and seen the original. Mufti Ilahi Bakhsh completed his Khatema or his Tatimma, as it's called. He finished in 1801. His original 1801 Nuskha copy is present in the academy. So you feel it, you touch it, it's there. There's a second edition of, I think, if I remember correctly, 1818, by a Hindu student of his who copied that Masnavi, because that was the tradition by which copies were made and exchanged and so on and so forth. And it was first published only in 1865 or 1867. And then, of course, in many more editions. And Tariq said now it is routinely published in both India and Pakistan, both in Farsi original and it's in Urdu translation. I was in Lahore University, and the second bookstore I go to, I find that it is there. And the bookseller said it sells very well because that is Masnavi. So to your question, we knew about it vaguely, but we now know it much better. And it has been translated into Sindhi and allegedly in other regional languages that I have not seen personally. This will be the first English translation of it. so that the English-speaking world comes to know about it.
Thank you. And that's a
That's it.
fantastic thing you're doing, and I'm very, very grateful. Sorry, Cyrus, too. I just love that the theme is being translated, and it's sort of like going to be known more as it deserves. So
No, it's wonderful.
And another
Please,
important
Imam Tariq. Yes.
another
Since I,
important
since I don't speak any
correlation that
Farsi.
I see between Mullah Bahrun Sahib Shara and Mufti Ilahi Bakhsh
Yes,
is that the time period is the same.
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
I was looking into it that Mullah Bahlum Sahib finished his commentary around 1805 and he passed
yeah,
away in 1810. Now,
It's very
Mufti Ilahi
interesting.
Baksh
yeah,
Sahib, he did the Tatimma, he wrote the Tatimma in 1801. So it was
yes,
around the same time period, which is very, very interesting.
yes.
Very interesting.
Why, Imam Tariq, do you have any maybe guesses as to why, or anybody else have any guesses?
For Mullah Bahlum Sahib, I can explain that he migrated a lot. I mean, he was born in Lucknow. He was there for 35 years. Then he went to Shah Jahanpur, then Rampur, and finally he came to present day Madras. Now, in Madras, he got kind of peace of mind. He got time because the Walaja, the ruler of that area, gave an entire madrasa to him. So he was the principal of the madrasa, and there were like hundreds of students that he will teach. But then Madras became his home. In 1810, he passed away, and he's buried there. So he got
In
this
Madras.
in yes in Madras. There's a
Okay.
huge masjid that's called Masjid Wala Jahi, and his qabr is there in Madras. Um, so in Madras, he got this peace of mind, and he did not migrate from Madras after that. So there he sat down and he wrote this Masnavi, the Shara of Masnavi. So yeah, before that he had written other books on Sharia, Usul al-Fiqh, and Hadith, and so on and so forth, and Fiqh. But one thing that I would like to mention here is that among in the family of Frangi Mahal, there was a great scholar who was the the student of Mullah Bahlum. His name was Mullah Mubin. Now he passed away in I think 1845 around that time. Now he was a great lover, one of the greatest lover of Masnavi. I mean, to the extent that in our family masjid, uh, and by the way, that masjid is called Mullah Mubin Masjid after him. He would give dars of Masnavi room, like nowadays we give dars of Quran or Hadith, and then great number of people will listen to him. And since Mullah Mubin himself was a great Sufi, so he will read from the commentary of Mullah Bahlum as well. So like Shariq Khan was, Dr. Shariq Khan was mentioning that in Deoband school of thought, Masnavi has become so popular, right? To the extent that Mona Thanvi Sahab and all the great ulamas of Deoband, rahimahullah, I mean, they will quote Masnavi and they will write about Masnavi. So I mean, Masnavi has been like a guiding light to our ancestors. And like Mr. Haroon Siddiqui Sahab was saying that, when the Farsi or the Persian language kind of disappeared from our culture, right? Then people kind of forgot about Masnavi, right? So I believe that somehow or other we need to bring it back, because we cannot lose it. I mean, we just cannot lose it. I mean, we need to do something to bring it back in the mainstream Muslim life.
Well, that's a wonderful point to end on, Imam Tariq, because I've been looking at the questions from our audience, which are excellent, and there's a lot of them. Our audience is very engaged, and the question that received the most upvotes, I think, is something that all three of you can think about and address, and it is: Could you elaborate on the particulars of how the Masnavi guides contemporary South Asian Muslims in their spiritual and day-to-day lives? I'll repeat that. Could you elaborate on the particulars of how the Masnavi guides today's South Asian Muslims in their spiritual and day-to-day lives? And I think it's a perfectly legitimate answer would be maybe it doesn't so much anymore. Maybe that has changed. And why has it changed? Imam Tariq was calling for a revival of reading a book on adab and akhlaq the way that the Masnavi is. How would you respond? How does the Masnavi guide contemporary South Asian Muslims in their day-to-day lives? Any of you, just out of order. It looks like
Yeah,
Haroon, you had your hand up. Please.
I don't know much about it, so I'll leave it to the other experts. Only to point out two things. One, I suppose that is far truer in Pakistan than it is in India. This is my guess. I don't know so, and Shariq can clarify. And in India, it is mostly restricted to the madrasas and the Islamic, very literary Islamic circles. It is certainly not in the public domain in India anymore because we don't speak Farsi, we don't hear about Farsi and so on. In Pakistan, it may be more so. That is my impression. But I'll leave it to the others to clarify.
Shariq?
Yes. Thank you so much. That's a very good question, and I think it can go both ways. I mean, we can talk about what continues and what doesn't continue. But I think we're sort of united in this sense that there is something already on the ground, and it needs to be recognized, acknowledged, and sort of supported and continued. So I think more specifically, there's obviously the existence of translations. Now, the problem of Persian not being a language that is widely understood anymore is obviously extremely relevant. And for those, and this also takes another question in this list about I think something like Qazi Sajjad's translation from the Persian into the Urdu, and a bilingual sort of interlinear translation. So you see the translation right below the actual Persian. That, I think, has been both a very important way in which this tradition has continued. And for someone who asks, there's a question for those who know Urdu, what's the best way to study the Masnavi? I think that would be one of the best ways, is get Qazi Sajjad's translation and look at both the Persian and the interlinear Urdu translation. And you'll realize that they're actually, if you know Urdu, you know a lot of Persian as well. So that's sort of like both an answer of what you can do and how does it proceed today. Now, obviously, there have been significant sort of differences and losses in a sense. So it's definitely, the existence of this phenomenon is much thinner than you would have seen perhaps a century ago. But again, it's not to say that it's not existent. One of the most common ways that it continues is the dars. And the dars takes place in multiple settings, in mosques, in khānaqāhs, in Islamic centers, and so forth. I mentioned the Imam in Aberdeen who has memorized the entire Masnavi. So that's something that's contemporary. I also mentioned that someone like Ahmed Javed on YouTube, that's another sort of like new forum. He's spoken a lot more about the Diwan of Shams, but it's still Rumi, and it has a large sort of like audience that can participate in a new form with the tradition of engagement with the Masnavi. The other thing that is another way of how...
Sorry to interrupt. Give short answers so that we can get to more questions.
Absolutely,
All of
absolutely.
us.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'll just the other major sort of form of guidance in everyday religious life or so forth is the citation in the khutbah, the citation in the sermon, and so forth. And that's very, very common. Even in the US, that's very common. You still hear that, and so that's I think the second sort of most prominent way of that this continues. So I'll stop there, and
Yeah,
sorry for the long.
a quick point that I'd like to add here is that Masnavi, as we see in history, right, has been used as a supporting text for Quran and Hadith. For example, I was reading that Professor Hussain Nasr did a work on Masnavi, and he came up with 6,000 verses from Masnavi, which are literally translation of Quran and Hadith.
Absolutely.
So this is very interesting. So, and then when we look into the element of love, which is the main theme of Masnavi, we find that this is something that this present generation and generations to come really need. And I really believe and again, I would like to repeat that since I'm an imam here, I feel that the community worldwide, right, needs to understand Mustavi in order to understand true love. Because the theme of Mustavi is love, and that's what we as Muslim community need to really talk about more and more. Yeah.
Yes. If I may add just one
Please,
sentence
Haroon
to
Sahib. Yes, please.
is simply when we speak about Rumi as a poet of love and so on and so forth, what we don't understand is when we talk of love, he is speaking of love of God. And when he tells stories of love, one of the great themes of Masnavi is there's a king, he has 3 sons, and he tells them not to go somewhere, but of course they go, and there these sons fall in love with a Chinese princess and they travel to China. What is all this? These are all allegorical. But he is using these stories of worldly love to eventually get to the theme of love with God, which is the ultimate thing that Rumi talks about. So, back to the original point, we have taken out all these allegorical things, love of God and everything, and he is now a guru of love, self-help guru who gives you these pithy lines to get on in your life with this celebrity. So we keep that in mind. That's very important.
Thank you,
Cyrus.
Yes. So I think we can have time for maybe 2 more questions if that's okay with everyone. This one that received the most upvotes, I'll read it, but I think it's a good way for us to think about the nature of these commentaries, because many of us haven't even read these commentaries. So the question is, what is the significance of Maulana's verse, "Har kasi az zan khud shod yar man az darun man najost asrar man," in shaping the diverse receptions of his work in South Asia? To what extent do commentators claim to draw out these asrar, these inner mysteries, and how do they situate such interpretive efforts in relation to Maulana's own spiritual practice? But let's take that question as just an opportunity, since all 3 of you have familiarity with the commentaries or the completion of the Masnavi. Well, what do they look like? What do they do? What is in them, really? Because maybe many members of our audience are unfamiliar with them. Are they bringing out mysteries? Are they explaining textual ambiguities? We'd love to hear from you. Haroon Sahib, we can't hear you. Haroon Sahib, we can't hear you. Your mic is cut off, Haroon.
No, sorry, I said I defer to you.
Dr. Khan, Shariq?
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Go ahead. No,
Okay,
I was
thank you.
just saying it would be interesting to hear Imam Tariq.
Should I?
Please.
Oh,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. That's a very interesting question, and to be honest, the commentaries are a whole other subject that requires, I think, uh, full sort of deep dives into just that genre alone. And my own work was sort of like trying to give a sense of the multiple genres in which the Masnavi is engaged with. So I think I've spent less time inside the commentaries than I would wish, and I hope to make up for that. But there's one aspect of the commentaries that is very interesting, and that's the one that I focused on the most. It's not really about, well, it is about interpretation, but not exactly. That's about the problem of textual stability, and the what verses of the Masnavi are ilhaqi, which means interpolations. This is a major problem in the reception of the Masnavi, which is settling a critical edition of the text, because there's so much variation. How do you rein in that variation to come up with a single text? One activity that is sort of like not really um, what we recognize the commentaries for, but is very present in the commentaries, is this discussion about, you see a particular verse, and then they talk about, is this verse actually Rumi's? Can we be sure? And then they talk about, I've seen this in these many manuscripts. I've consulted four, and they have it in this way. So that's one way. You say like all four of them have it in this way, and therefore it must be correct. The other way that is more interpretive is that, does this fall in line with Maulana Rumi's own spiritual religious commitments and his poetic style? So that can be a very illuminating discussion when they try to make decisions about whether this particular verse is part of the original Masnavi, or is it a later interpolation. So that activity is actually very, very interesting, and it involves a number of interpretive, aesthetic considerations, and it's very prominent in the commentaries.
So one of the things that we see in these commentaries is that, for example, Mullah Bahlul's commentary, what see is that he had interpreted the Masnavi in a way that he brought the ashar of Masnavi in line with the message from Quran and Hadith. For example, I'm reading right now one of the share of Masnavi regarding Kohetur, right? And so Mullah Bahlum had interpreted the incident of Musa and Kohetur in a way in which he quoted Quran, and he said that, look, Allah in Quran said that, only the heart of a human being can hold the love of God, and Kohetur became turned into stones when the tajalli of Allah came over it, because the Kohetur could not withhold the love of God, but the human heart can. So, which is an example how these learned scholars of the past, when they interpreted Masnavi, they interpreted it from the Quran and the Sunnah point of view. And this also helps us understand that Masnavi Masnavi is actually an explanation of the message of Quran and Hadith, and this is why it has been so popular among the learned scholars, because they accepted it as an interpretation the meaning of Quran and Hadith. And this is what we need to bring it back in the mainstream Muslim thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Please,
so
Haroon
if I may just add the following to it. You see, Maulana Rumi himself said, and as many other scholars have said, there are perhaps 7 meanings of everything that is in the Quran. Or put differently, as scholars and shuyukh have put it, it's the word of God, but it is interpreted by human beings. So different people read different things into it, and it leads to various arguments and so on, and especially about the allegorical parts of the Quran. Not to draw a direct comparison, but similar sorts of arguments take place with the Masnavi and other poems. But this is really it's really within the confined walls of the very learned people. It is not in the common consciousness of the public. So you go back to the Coleman Barks of this continent and this contemporary time, or Deepak Chopra. People like me sort of look down on it, but at the same time, then you say, but they have done a great service. They have made him popular. They have brought it to the public imagination, which people in India and Pakistan have not done. They have not done because it is confined to the schools and confined to the learned and so on and so forth. So the learned people are very valuable. We hold them in great esteem, but it would be far better to have translations in Bengali and Tamil and Sindhi and Punjabi and so on and so forth to bring it to the popular consciousness, which is what is missing. So, in fact, what is ironic that here is a man of the East who has been adopted in India, but it has been popularized by the Western people whom we criticize, whereas we in India and Pakistan and the Islamic world have not done it. And the second part of it is really, which is generally not spoken about. In the Arab part of the world, including Saudi Arabia and so on, no one ever hears about Rumi because he is persona non grata almost. So we should be grateful for what has been done in the West, that it has been popularized, brought to the public consciousness. We all are speaking about him. You and I, at least I understand it mostly in English as opposed to Farsi. So we have these various dichotomies going on at the same time. Cyrus.
Shariq, please.
Yeah, just to add to both of these, I think Imam Tariq mentioned the. I think it's true that this is perhaps the most basic function of the commentary is to relate the verses of the Masnavi back to verses of the Quran and the Hadith. This activity you see almost in all the commentaries. We should also note that the Masnavi, not only are the verses, many of the verses derived from Quranic subject matter, but they include as citation Quranic verses in part or in full, so that to identify which surah, which verse this is coming from, that's one activity. To identify in those cases where the citation is not direct but it's implied, to identify where is that coming from. These are very a bulk of the commentaries do this. I would also like to add that the commentaries are very intertextual in that they talk to each other. So Maulana Baharul Uloom is engaging with commentaries before him as well. So he's engaging with the commentaries of Abdul Latif. He's engaging with the commentaries of Wali Akbar Abadi. And in this activity of identifying Quranic verses and hadith, there's even disagreements. And so if Abdul Latif wrote that this particular verse, Vishnu as nature, for example, comes from this verse, then Maulana Baharul Uloom you often see this, that he discusses that Abdul Latif says this and Wali Akbar Abadi says this. However, I think that it comes from this particular Quranic verse. So there's a cumulative sort of increase in specificity of the identification of the relationship between the Quran and the Hadith. And the third sort of layer of commentary is more ideological. And so Maulana Baharul Uloom also sees a lot of the Masnavi through the theology of Ibn Arabi, for example. So that would be a sort of another layer of interpretation. But it's very true that this relationship between where is the verse coming from the Quran and the Hadith, and discussions about that's a important activity that you see in the commentary.
Haroon, please.
Yeah, to give you a contemporary example, Professor Javed Mujaddidi, for example, has done an English translation, and it's been done by the Oxford World Classics, and he has translated all 6 books. The latest one just came out in December. The greatness of this particular work is that Professor Mujaddidi gives the Quranic references properly, and he collates them and he mentions it. So this is the more contemporary work that I know of that takes you back to the Quran and identifies which verse it is coming from, which hadith is he referring to. So it's a very useful, more contemporary work in understandable, simple English.
Excellent. Well, we're almost out of time. The question, I think this is a question we can address quickly and then wrap it up, and it's the one with the highest votes currently. It is, do you feel that an avowedly Islamic presentation of Maulana's work can be successful and popular? Haroon Sahib, you were talking about the kind of the way that the Islamic elements of Rumi's poetry were taken out of it to make a more popular sort of Rumi. This question is saying, okay, now if we present Rumi as he is, an Islamic version of Rumi's poetry, I mean, would people be interested? Would it have a large audience? So we'd love to hear from each of you. I mean, Imam Tariq, you're engaged with a large group of Muslims, being the imam of the largest masjid in Orlando, and I think in all of Florida. So I'd love to hear from all of you on this topic.
I definitely believe that and it will be widely accepted and it will become popular because there is a need to bring back all these gems into mainstream. And this is, I mean, we are living in a time where all kind of wrong notions about Islam and Muslim are spreading, and I think Masnavi could become a very important um, player in this. So I personally, I mean, the more I study Masnavi, the more I believe that so much work needs to be done to bring some kind of awareness in the masses towards this great work. And Harun Saab just now mentioned this new work by Mujaddidi that had come up, and I'm going to buy this book and I'm going to read. But yes, I mean, the more the more work is done on Masnavi, the better the world would be.
Thank you. How about we go, Haroon Saab, and then Dr. Khan Shariq will give you the last, the closing words.
No, I mean, the simplest thing to say is that the more the better, obviously. There is no shortage of old commentaries, for example, that anchor the commentary in the Quranic content of the Masnavi. What is required is to simplify it for the general public, and that work has not been done yet. That work needs to be done not just in Arabic or Farsi, it needs to be done in various languages. English to start with, then, as I mentioned earlier, in India and Pakistan context, we see what is generally not realized in the outside world is that South Asia, and especially India and Pakistan, have produced perhaps the second most voluminous commentary on the Quran and Islam. All of the writings in Urdu and other languages and so on is a treasure. So what it needs to be done is that you have taken this Masnavi and their very highfalutin commentaries and write it in the languages that people will understand and popularize it.
And Dr. Khan, your thoughts?
Thank you. I think it's a very good question, and I think it's sort of touching on this tension between, on the one hand, you can have the Masnavi become very, very popular if you do certain things to it, and that's what sort of Coleman Barks that version does. And then on the other hand, I think the question is very rightly sort of concerned that, well, if you uh, you know, display its groundedness in the Quran and the Hadith and in the Islamic tradition, will we lose those readers? So I think it's a great question. I think the best thing would be for it to remain in a dialectic, in a dialogue. As in, we're grateful for the kind of work that popularizers such as Coleman Barks have done. At the same time, we see the need to, so we can say it captures something of the Masnavi, but not its entirety. And then there can be another side which kind of does this correction or addition, or shows that yes, it's this great thing, but it also has these layers. And in a sense, that's precisely, I think you yourself in your journey, Cyrus, represents this dialectic at its best, because you mentioned that you got into Islamic studies through Coleman Barks, and now you're doing that work which is more grounded and accurate and so forth. So I think we're obviously extremely lucky to have you. And so if we have to owe that to Coleman Barks, then all the better for us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's really sweet of you to say, and I'm grateful really to all of you for the time you've given us, for your insights, Dr. Khan, Imam Tariq, Haroon Sahib, you guys. I mean, it's just been a wonderful time. I'm getting all kinds of compliments from our attendees, but really it wouldn't have been possible without all of you, the participants as well. Thank you for being here. This video will be available on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. I'll just post it once I can download it, and then you can share it with anyone you like. But again, thank you all for being here, and maybe we can do this again on another topic sometime. So thank you.